So John was first introduced to something called a rule of life back in 2013. And soon after, he came to me and he pitched the idea about having a rule of life. And long story short, I was like, no. Nothing about it sounded appealing to me. It was fine for him to do, but there were a number of things, this whole idea of having kind of like a rule of our life, it turned me off for a few different reasons. First of all, I was afraid that it was going to just be something aspirational. If you walk into someone's house and you see the live, laugh, love, like just words up on a wall that don't really mean anything. Like I was afraid it was going to be like that. Okay, we're going to come up with this rule of our life, and it's not really going to mean anything. So that was my first reason why I didn't want to do it. The second reason why I didn't want to do it was I was afraid it would just lead to a guilt trip. That we would come up with, oh, come on in, high schoolers. We've got some high schoolers joining us here. We'll welcome you in here. I think there's some chairs along the back, all along the side here, and then there's some up here as well. So I didn't think it would matter. I thought it was just aspirational. The second thing was I was afraid it would just be a giant guilt trip, a constant reminder of the things we wished that we were doing, but were continually falling short from. And the third reason why I didn't want to do a rule of life was because I don't like rules. John loves rules. I still remember a few years ago, we were playing a game with my family. We were home for Christmas or something. We're playing the game, and my dad, about halfway through, stops, and he turns to John, and he goes, "Your favorite part about this game is learning a new rule, isn't it?" And John was like, yeah. And so I don't take the same pleasure out of having a rule as John would. But there were 5 things that started shifting in me, that started making me open to this, to the point where I thought, yeah, this is something that I actually want to pursue. Number 1, and you guys, this one's it's gonna sound crazy, but Lauren Shepard and I, you didn't know I was gonna say this, went to Disney World. Okay? We went to Disney World last year for a leadership training institute thing, and while we were there, they did this whole training on Disney and the 5 keys, that they had these 5 values that they ran their whole operation on. And I was just enamored by this, because you could actually see how these words, how this rule actually played out throughout the entire Disney World area. Do you want to know what their top value is, by the way? What's that?
What do you think it is? What do you think?
Fun. Anyone else take a stab at this? Family. Get in line. Feels that way. So their top value is safety. That before anything, so get in line, that's part of it there. But the way they were talking about this, I came home and I was like, John, this is a good idea. And he's like, I know, Mandy, I've been saying this since 2013. So that was number 1, seeing it in Disney. Number 2 was remembering that we had kind of dabbled in stuff like this back in 2009. So back in 2009, some of you have heard me tell this story. Our oldest son, Sam, was 2, and he had a fever of 101.3, which is normal, but he had a fever of 101.3 for 9 months. Every single day, he had this fever. We're going to doctors all around, and we're not getting any answers. We're hearing rheumatoid arthritis. We're hearing leukemia. We got a lot of scary things going on at the time. And we had read a book at that time that talked about having a family battle cry, where you've got like a word or a concept that just provides structure to your life at that time. And for us, we chose the word health. So everything about our life during that season was about health. It meant dusting more, or dusting, I should say. Prioritizing doctor's appointments. So health became this rallying cry. Spoiler alert, we got to the end of 9 months, and the diagnosis that he officially got was fever of unknown origin, which is, the doctor just looked at me and said, these fevers are going to disappear as mysteriously as they came. Stop taking his temperature because it's going to drive you crazy. So that was number 2. Number 3 was John had written up a rule of life, just a one-page document on what it was. And I don't remember how I found it. It was just kind of lying around somewhere. It was in the copier we both work at Noggle Christian Ministries building over there. He left it in the copier, and I saw it, and I picked it up, and I read it. And there was a phrase in there that caught my eye, and that was all about how a rule of life should be 80% of stuff that you are already doing. Otherwise, it's not a rule of life, it's a document of despair. That is pretty good.
That's a good line.
And I read that, and then, okay, I'm starting to catch an imagination for this now. This is not a document of despair. There's something here that's naming stuff that we're already doing. Two other things that started prepping my heart for a rule of life type thing. So number 4 was thinking back to our early marriage days before we had kids, and how early in our marriage we fought every Saturday morning, and it was never about anything important. Most fights are seldom about anything important, but we were talking to the counselor about this. Like we fight every Saturday morning. And she pointed it out to us that was unstructured time for us. That was the one time of the week when our time was unstructured. And thinking back on that time, I was going, boy, some kind of rule of life that I can see how that would have been helpful for us when we were first married.
Or at least for me, you love unstructured time.
I wasn't going to say that.
Favorite, but and I like it too much. Yeah.
And then finally, a few years ago, as a family, we ended up making a distinction between 3 things. Trips that were a part of vocation, trips that were visitation, and trips that were vacation. Okay, by vocation, I mean like job-related stuff. Sometimes we would take the whole family on a job visit. So I'd tell the kids, hey, it's preach and beach time. I'm gonna preach, and then we're gonna go to the beach. But the kids couldn't really grasp that I had to work during vacation time. It didn't go so well. So we found we were better off not calling this vacation time, but calling it vocation time. Kids, we're not going on vacation, we're going on vocation. Dad's working, mom's working, but you're gonna come along. That was one. The second was visitation. We love our family. We love visiting our family. It's not vacation. It's not vacation if you're planning around, if you're working with someone else on their schedule. And then there is the vacation where it's us just doing things, okay? This is all set up to say this. A few years ago, I'll see if I can get through this without crying. A few years ago, it became clear to us that John's dad was getting older. And it became really important to us that we see Keith and Sharon as often as we could. It wasn't an official rule of life, but it was the hint of one, where we decided that we were going to try to have a visitation as often as we could, even quarterly. What if we could see John's parents quarterly here? And because we called it visitation and not vacation, it meant we thought a little bit differently about our time. Normally when you go on vacation, you want a chunk of time to really get away, right? But when it was just visitation, we decided that we would go even if we only had a day and a half with them. In some ways, it didn't make sense to fly to Florida for a day and a half. But we decided, no, the visitation, seeing them is more important than, we're not trying to get away. And so we'd look for tickets regularly, for cheap tickets where we could go even just for a day and a half. And as I was reflecting on this after Keith died, was just so grateful that had been one of our rhythms that we had gotten into. So I bring all that up to say that John first ran into this concept in 2013. I only became more open to it in the last 6, 8, 9 months or so. And so what we're going to be sharing with you...
It's been a year now. You can give yourself credit.
Okay, yeah. Okay. It's for a whole year now. And so that's set up to say, as we're going into this, I I just wanted to be transparent about my own resistance here and kind of the steps that opened me up to this kind of thing. The other thing I want to mention too, we've had a few different questions come up this week. Questions like, is this just for people with children? And the answer is no. In fact, towards the end, I'll share with you some of the rule of life stuff that we've seen emerge for Keith and Sharon. This is not just for people with children, and this is not just for people who are married. In some ways, there's some ease that comes when you're not having to coordinate with anybody else. And I think my mother-in-law Sharon would tell you that as a widow right now, having this kind of rule in her life, these kinds of rhythms, has actually been really needed, really helpful.
Yeah, so the Lord be with you. I'll listen now to the Word of God. I invite you just to take a moment and close your eyes and take a deep breath. And receive these words of Christ, first listening in to him as he prays to his Father, and then as he turns and addresses you. At that time, Jesus said, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and of earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the intelligent, and have instead revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, for such was your good pleasure. All things have been handed over to me by my Father. And no one recognizes the Son except the Father, and no one recognizes the Father except the Son and the one to whom the Son reveals. Come to me, all who are overworked and carrying heavy burdens, and I will cause you to rest. Take my yoke upon you and become a student of mine, because I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your lives. For my yoke is fitting, and my burden is bearable. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So for a long time, I've been exploring for myself, helping others, and in recent years, exploring together as a family, how to discern a fitting yoke, right? A fitting yoke. What is the yoke that I am being invited to carry? So a clarifying statement right out of the gate, because I did an older version of this teaching many moons ago, and it only became clear to me at the end that a person in the room thought I was talking about a yolk, Y-O-L-K, and it was wonderful. They were taking it so seriously, like discerning the yolk, right? Like telling the yolk apart from the white in the egg. It was very interesting. What a wonderful conversation after that. But this is a yoke, Y-O-K-E, and a yoke is a ancient but still used to this day mechanism or tool by which two oxen or two animals, for that matter, can be linked together and then be attached to some kind of burden, whether that's pulling a plow or pulling a cart or even pulling a stagecoach with people on it or whatnot. And when you see most pictures you'll see of a pair of oxen or horses in a yoke, they'll be the same size. You'll see two equally yoked oxen or horses pulling a burden. But occasionally you can find a picture of a yoke with a big old oxen or a big old horse and a tiny little one next to them in a yoke that they've adjusted to fit the little guy. And when you see one of those, and you can picture it even in your mind right now, the big old oxen, the big horse, they're carrying most of the load and mostly dragging along the little young one. And this, from early days prior even to Jesus himself, this was a way of speaking about how a teacher relates to a student, right? You take on your teacher, your rabbi's yoke, right? And it did not mean that the teacher was the farmer or the driver with the whip trying to get you to go and carry the burden. It was assumed amongst the Jews that God was the master. Of course, we're learning not to obey one another, but to obey him. But we don't know how to obey. We're immature, we're weak, we need help, we need growth, we need teaching, we need guidance. And so a teacher, which would be the big oxen in this case, who's been obeying God and carrying the life of obedience for a long time, has grown strong, mature, knows the way, knows the master's voice, takes a little one alongside them and teaches them how to carry this burden. Yes? Makes sense so far? Mm-hmm. Right, so this imagery was stock imagery. This isn't unique to Jesus. Jesus comes along in this statement, speaking first to his Father. Thank you, Lord, that you've kept these things hidden from all the smart oxen out there who think they've got it all sorted out, and all the ways they put a yoke on another, try to get them to pull a huge burden that they're not ready to carry. And then turns to us and says, come to me. I'll give you some relief, which would be another way to translate it. I should have gone with relief today, because it's not come to me, take a break, there's no yoke to carry. No. Come to me, all who are overburdened, right? Too large of a burden, you can't carry it. Come to me and I will give you relief, right? I'll relieve you of this unfit yoke, this too large of a burden, right? And I invite you to then take on my yoke, right? Take on a yoke next to me, and I'll show you how it's done, right? And my yoke, he says, fits, I think, what is it called? Most translations, easy, which is fine. That's not a wrong translation, but the root word for easy and kind in Greek comes from the word for that which is fitting, that which fits the circumstance. That's why it's kind, to take into account the circumstances that another one is in. That's what it means to be kind. It doesn't just mean to be nice. It's to recognize, you can only handle so much, so I'm going to be kind to you. I'm going to be fitting in my response to you. So he has a fitting yoke, a kind yoke, an easy yoke, right? What makes it easy is that it fits right. It's not too big, it's not too small, it's just right? Designed for you, right? And his burden, it's not strictly light. I mean, it is light. That's why it's a relief. It's lighter than the others. But the word there is, it's bearable. It's something you can actually carry. Not something you should carry, or we wish all of us could carry, or you ought to carry. It's something you actually can carry. That's what makes something light, is that you can carry it, right? So what does it mean to then discern our yoke? Right? This is the ancient spiritual practice of a rule of life. The rule of life is the yoke that Jesus has designed just for you, right? So you don't just create a rule of life or find a rule of life. You discern it. You discover it in conversation with Jesus and with those who you're walking alongside. So discerning the yoke. Discerning the yoke. Let's just sit with that for a minute. So Jesus says, "Come to me, all who are weary and overburdened." Right, so this message is being spoken to those who already have a rule of life. A rule of life that has been imposed on them, and it doesn't fit, and they can't pull it. Mm-hmm. And so I speak to you the bad news, which will soon become the good news. You all already follow a rule of life. All lives are lived according to a rule. All lives are lived according to the rule. So the beginning of discerning the yoke is noticing the yoke you're already under. Every life is ruled by something, right? Some rules of life are explicit, some are implicit, some are, you know about it, sometimes you don't. Some have been chosen, some have been imposed, some are a mix of all of these things. Some are just, many of them are unjust, right? So the journey to discerning the yoke, the journey to developing a rule of life in conversation with Christ begins with realizing what already rules your life. Surely some good things, but also some things that weigh you down, that burden you. And Jesus' invitation is to take that yoke off and put his on, because his fits. It's just for you. It's made just for you. And by the way, you'll grow into it, and the yoke will adjust over time to fit you as you grow. But we'll get to that later. That's not for today. Yeah. Last time I said sit with that for a moment because I was thinking about what to say next. This time I'll be honest. I'm going to sit with that for a moment. So something to be thinking about even as I speak, and we may have an opportunity to do this later even, is begin to think, consider what already rules your life. Mm-hmm. I was practicing rule of life as an individual for a long time, as Mandy attested. And this is not because I'm more spiritual, but because I'm more rigid by nature, as she indicated. So some of us have the disorder of having just a deep aversion to rules, regulations, patterns, structures. Some of us are cursed with an unfit, undue attachment to rules, regulations, and structures, right? My hunch is every pair in here, every couple in here, you've got one of each. That's pretty common, right? So you probably already know. Although you might imagine you're the one who likes the regulations and then the other one's like, no, you don't. But typically you know. So I was drawn to these things quite quickly, but often would just grab a yoke from someone else, you know. I remember the first time I was asked to put together a little rule of life document in a training program, a spiritual direction training program I was in. That's where the date comes from, 2013. And I had this little thing on my wall, this little chart with individual, corporate practices of devotion and practices of compassion. This little 4-part chart that I know at least Ethan would recognize because it's from Dave Ward. It's lovely. Am I a practicing Christian on the other side? Remember that? It's great. It's one of his best, right? That was on my wall. That's a commitment I'd made to lean into those practices. I'm like, there it is. That's my rule of life. I'm already leaning into that. I just took that to my thing, and that was a good start, But after a while, I kind of realized this is just somebody else's rule of life. This isn't one that I'm discovering and discerning with Christ. So I stole another one from a desert father for a little while. And then I really started finding what mine actually looks like. And that's been in more recent years, and that has led to us doing this together as a family, which we'll get to soon. But what made me really, and I taught these things to inner circles of students who wanted to be discipled by me, students in my spiritual formation classes, but I never really felt any, I gotta be honest, I kind of just gave up on this being something that was for everybody, right? I looked at you because that's kind of what made me think that. But no, I was kind of, I have to confess, there's some sin and some pride in this where it was oh, this is for the serious people. This is, or the people with my, issues who just love the rules on the back of the box. That's the best part, You're like, ooh, what is it? Oh, you go, let's look up the rules. Your father goes, oh, okay. That it was just for some of us, right? And it wasn't until March and then early April of 2020, a date that lives in infamy for most of us in the United States, when we entered into lockdown. And I started seeing on social media this recurring phrase. Heard it from my friends too a little bit, but especially seeing it on social media. I don't know what day it is. Do you remember that feeling? I don't know what day of the week it is. And this was a real moment of calling for me to actually start leaning in as a family and teaching this more broadly. Because I had no idea what they were talking about. I always knew what day it was. And I was wondering why. And then it hit me. Oh, I have some things in my life that tell me what day it is other than my job. Mm-hmm. So we'll just start with that. And for those who are in school, it's going to be, that's your job, your school schedule, both high school, college, and beyond. And for those who are retired, as we've discovered, it's your doctor's appointments, right? You know what day it is, right? But we all had these external factors that told us what day it was. And when those were suddenly out of nowhere, for no fault of our own, taken away from us, we didn't know what day it was. Wouldn't you like to know what day it was for some reason other than your job telling you, right? And that was when it first dawned on me. I'm like, no, this is for everyone. As Christians as a whole, we're being invited to discern a yoke, right? What does it look like to have a life that's ruled by Christ, right? One that's ruled together, walking together. Rhythms and values that define our lives beyond the externals, right? School, job, doctors, culture, shopping, whatever else. Yeah? So that was the core of the inspiration to say this is worth all of us leaning into and exploring. So I think I'll stop there because my time is up.
All right. What I'm going to invite you to do here is to take about 60 seconds of silence, pull this out in front of you, go to the back where there are not any lines. Do we have more of these if we need them? Yeah, I think some of the teenagers that came in might not have one. If you need one of these, will you put a hand up?
Can I tell a joke while they're finding them?
Sure, tell a joke.
Notice, it's 2 full pages with lines. And look where Mandy wants you to go. The part without the lines. Sorry.
That was rules.
just notice, just an observation.
And on that lovely blank page, regardless of how you feel about your own artistic skills, I'm going to invite you to draw you and to draw God. Draw a big oxen and a small oxen. You can decide what these oxen look like. They might just be boxes, and that's okay. God and you with some type of connection that fits you both, okay? Just draw an image of this yoke. Let's take about 60 seconds. God, you, yoke. And John's going to read that passage of scripture one more time. And as he reads, I'm going to encourage you to latch on to a few of the words that he says and write them down next to your yoke, okay? So by the time he's done finishing this passage, you have an image in front of you and God and some of the words, some of the conditions that God is calling you into.
At that time, Jesus said, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and of earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and the intelligent, and instead have revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, because such it was pleasing in your sight. All things have been given to me by my Father. And no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and the one to whom the Son wishes to reveal. Come to me, all who are weary and overburdened, and I will give you relief. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find relief for your lives. For my yoke is fitting, and my burden is bearable.
Amen. Just to orient you for the rest of our time together here, John's going to jump into what exactly a rule of life is, the things that consist of a rule of life, and then I'll follow up with what it looks like in our house. We'll give some examples there, not for you to copy, but more to give some examples, and then we'll talk about next steps for you, what it might look like for you to lean into some of this yourself.
Thanks, Mandy. Actually, just take 2 minutes and share some of the words. You don't have to share your drawing with your neighbors if that makes you uncomfortable. Although, what is ruling you that makes you think you can't share it? But just share some of your words with your neighbors. Just do that for 2 minutes. So a rule of life exists in your life. Okay, that your rule of life is your life itself. And how it's lived. But one of the key elements of the practice of living according to a rule of life is to actually write something down, okay? So this is important because if you were to say, starting with that drawing perhaps, and were to write more things around that, that would describe the life you live, as well as maybe a few things you'd like to add to that or take away from that. That would not, in fact, be your rule of life. That would be a document of your rule of life. Do you see the distinction, right? Your rule of life's lived. It's not the document. But we are going to take the risk and invite you over the next couple months as we meet once a month together to begin to draft a rule of life document, And I'll just say right out of the gate, aim for a page. If you can't fit it on a page, it's probably too much. It's probably somebody else's yoke, okay? Get it on a page. That would be my suggestion. I mean, the most influential rule of life, and it's a community rule of life, which is always more complicated, than the rule of life for an individual or a family, is the famous rule of St. Benedict. This is the 1980 translation. They came out with this in 1980 to celebrate the 1,500th anniversary of the Order of St. Benedict. Can you imagine starting a parachurch organization and it exists 1,500 years later? Anyway, so, and yes, I'm the weirdo who keeps this in their pocket. So yeah, that did just come out, right? Yeah. It's the pocket edition. This is falling off, apologies. This will help. Let's take those off. So this is about, 70 plus pages. That's too long, don't do that. A page will do. As Mandy already mentioned, the most important thing to remember is that it should be about 80% descriptive of a life you already lead, okay? And the way to develop a rule of life document is to begin with some time of prayer alone or with family members or those who you do life with. It could be done in any size community, individual, family, a group. And begin with a time of prayer, asking the Lord to guide you. And then to begin then from there to list all of the stabilizing forces in your life. The stabilizing forces, that's what you're looking for. What are those things that are the baseline? Not the aspirations, not my favorite things, the stabilizing things, the things that keep you sane, the things that keep you grounded, the things that keep you connected to God and to God's people. That's what you start with. And if you're gonna ask me, so like religious things, spiritual things, sure. Do they have to be that? No, right? When you study the ancient rules of life, it's one page, it's all a bunch of spiritual stuff about prayer and this, and then the next page is all about like what to do with the tools and make sure you always clean them before you put them back in the barn. And it's like, because those are the stabilizing forces in an individual, family, or community's life, right? Those patterns that we live by, right? So prayerfully consider, what are those key stabilizing forces? And you start to list them, and then you pause and you give thanks. Give thanks that God's already given you some stabilizing forces, right? And then you begin to explore prayerfully. Again, we'll do this over the next couple months, so you don't have to remember all these things, just giving you a picture of it. Then explore, is there maybe some things that need to come off? I don't need them anymore. Those are actually being imposed upon me. They are unjust or unhelpful. And what maybe needs to come on? But again, 80% just describing the life you already have, and maybe about 20% things you're feeling called to take away or add. Okay, does that make sense, that 80-20? The way that we have started framing this isn't the only structure, but it's a structure, is to think of values and rhythms. Values and rhythms. And what we've landed on, because it's something that you can actually remember, you could fit it on one page, but you could actually remember it even without the page in front of you, is to think, what would maybe be about 5 values that guide us and 5 rhythms, right, that shape our daily life. And Mandy will say more about what those become for us and how we discovered them. I'll just speak of the structure, the framework for now. And again, remember that 80-20 rule, right? So if you were as an individual or as a family or community, come up with 5 values and 5 rhythms, time that shape your time and life, you'd want 4 of each of those to already be true of you, right? 5 values that are purely aspirational will do very little. It'll be a cute thing to stick on your wall, but you won't live by it, right? Think what are at least 4 values that actually would be the values that people would infer if they watched you and how you lived, right? And then maybe 1 you'd like to add, right? One more aspirational one. And the same with rhythms, maybe about 4 rhythms that are already existent. And then maybe 1 you'd like to add, replacing something you'd like to take away. So I'll say a little more about that framework and then hand to you. Is that good? So again, the hands is nice. This is the parable that has emerged for us in recent years, recent months even, is to think of the right hand as the rhythms and the left hand as the values. Why right and left? Well, does anyone here play a little bit of guitar? Anyone play a little guitar? Who's played guitar? You raise your hand if you played a little bit of guitar. Okay, just a little bit of you. Oh, well, it's a good parable. Jesus has a bunch of parables about farming. Most of you aren't farmers, but you understand them, right? So anyway, so I play a little guitar, and the guy who taught me how to play guitar, some of you know him, it's Sam Bills, he only taught me like 3 chords. And like for months, all I knew was 3 chords. And he focused everything on the right hand. It was all about the rhythm. He taught me how to palm mute, how to, go like all the different rhythm patterns that you would do with your right hand, right, to set the pattern. And most of you know me as a drummer, and that's because I play a guitar like a drum. So eventually I just switched to drums. Because it's all this, right? I didn't learn chords till way later, right? And but for those of you who do play guitar, you would know that the left hand is where you make the chords. That's where you actually make the notes. That's where the melody and harmony comes in. The right hand has none of that. The right hand's all rhythm, right? And if I have a tendency in my attachment to rules and regulations and structures, it's to have all rhythm and no melody, no harmony, right? It means nothing. I just know what I do every day. It's why I knew what it was Tuesday during the pandemic, right? But I didn't know why often. I just did, right? So there's those rhythms, that right hand, are those stabilizing forces in my routines and rhythms that shape my life, right? And then there's those values. Those are actually the song I'm trying to sing, right? That guide me and actually give it meaning and not just force. Okay? So some of us are gonna be drawn to rhythms first, just by nature, and that's okay. Some of us are gonna be drawn to values first, just by nature.
I played the piano for years. Thought that I
wasn't gonna tell it.
I know, yeah. You were talking, I thought, oh, this is my example here. I played the piano for years, and it wasn't until I got into high school that I got a new piano teacher who was able to put his finger on the problem of my piano playing, and that's that I was always playing by ear and not really reading the rhythms of the music. I never learned the theory behind it. Every other piano teacher I'd say, can you play it for me first? Then they'd play it, and I'd get the rhythms down, and then I would play it too. And then Scott Leggett, some of you know him, was like, no, I'm not gonna play it for you. You play it. And that's when I realized I don't have any rhythm. So my piano playing is all melody, no rhythm. And I am drawn to the values, and the rhythms of life are what's coming secondary to me.
Yeah. I think that's it. You're good. Should I say something more? That's the basic framework. Values, rhythms, pick it up from either end. Both matter, mutually reinforce each other. I think that's enough.
Okay, great.
I could have ended on something more grand, but this is real life stuff. It ain't grand. It's simple.
So this is what our rule of life looks like. It's 2 hands. When we talked through this with our kids, we had our 10-year-old put his hands down. We traced his hands, and we put down a rhythm in each finger and a value in each finger and thumb. And I'll share with you what we've got here, not because this is what you should try to do at your house, but more to give you an example, some placeholders perhaps for you. So we'll start with the rhythm hand, this right hand here.
What a great place to start.
What a great place to start. I wish I had piano teachers that started me there. So these are our 5 rhythms here. We talked about what we do daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly. Those are our rhythms. So our daily rhythm, the things that we do every day are we pray before meals and bedtime with the kids, and we do a 1-word testimony. So at the dinner table, everybody will share their 1 word. If you've had dinner with us, we make you do this too. We've got it written down here. Started that in the pandemic.
And can I jump in and just say, if you average 3-4 days out of 7 days a week, that counts as daily. Like, let's secret of the easy yoke here. Don't if I don't do it every day, Just thought I'd throw that in. You look at our little book, and there's lots of gaps in there.
Yeah.
Proceed.
That's our daily.
That's it.
That's all we have down. Weekly, then, we have down Sabbath and the Lord's Day.
Saturday, Sunday.
Saturday, Sunday. And that Sabbath practice, for me at least, was one that took a really, really, really long time to start. Back in 2018, I was diagnosed with Sjogren's, which is an autoimmune disease, and my body was really flaring up at that time and was quite sick. And I had a coach at the time, and he knew about my work rhythms and knew that things were somewhat intense. And he said, and he never tells me what to do. He's always just kind of like those leading questions, and this was the first time he took a directive. Mandy, you have to X. And he said, Mandy, you have to take a Sabbath every week, and you need to ask John to hold you accountable and thank him in advance because you will never thank him again. It'll drive you crazy. So John held me accountable to this, and the first time I took a Sabbath, I hated it. The second time I took a Sabbath, I did not like it. The third time, I went through an entire year of taking a Sabbath without enjoying it.
Yeah.
It took me that long to get into a rhythm that I knew that I valued, but I did not enjoy it at first because I like my job.
Yes.
I wanted to jump back into these things. And by the way, the saving grace for me there, you gave me this idea, was to do a sundown to sundown. That's my sweet spot for Sabbaths.
You liked the first half of your Sabbath, Friday night and sleeping.
Yeah, Friday night and sleeping. And then I'd wake up on Saturday and be like, All right, so daily we've got the prayer, bread and meals, and one-word testimony. Weekly, Sabbath and Lord's Day. Monthly, and this was our aspirational one, dates with the children, individual dates with our kids. That was one of those things that it tended to happen accidentally, but it was something that as we were developing our own rule of life, we realized we want to lean into that a bit more. We want to be intentional about that, especially with our oldest now that he has his license. We have to be extra intentional to get time with him. So that's monthly. Quarterly has been visits with grandparents, as well as intentional extended time for the two of us, whether that's a short getaway or a long day date away. And then yearly family vacation. Not visitation, not vocation, vacation. Those are our rhythms. Some of them might sound spiritual, some of them do not, but they've kept us living the kind of life that we value, that we want to live. Anything else you'd say there about rhythms?
Just to reiterate, the four of those were already in place before we wrote this down this summer.
Yeah.
We just wrote this down for the first time this summer.
Yeah, and next steps for you, just a spoiler alert, we'll be asking you to pay attention to this between now and the next time we meet. And then we've got our left hand, our values. And these are the values that we came up with. So with the thumb, joy. And you should know too, these weren't just words that we kind of picked up. Oh, we like this word, we like this word, we like this word. What we did was we sat down, and again, we'll get into this more down the road. But we sat down and we asked, what are the phrases that we tend to say around our house? What are the idioms that we repeat? Or what are the things that the children tease us for? I'll get to those here in a minute. But the joy of the Lord is our strength has been a phrase that has been so important, at least for John and myself. I remember someone sharing with me, if the devil wants you weak, he will go after your joy. The joy of the Lord is your strength. So that is something that we pay attention to. This is a value of ours in our family. We want to live our lives to cultivate joy. That was number one. Number two, compassion. The phrase that goes with that for us is start with heart. It got prompted, though, because the children were mocking me. They realized, I'll say this first, they realized they had all kinds of things to tease John for and not very many things for me. And I heard about this secondhand, if I've got this correct, where all the kids were in the car and Paul in the back was was mimicking his mother. And for the record, I don't think I have ever said these words, but what Paul said was, and mom's always like, trust your feelings. and apparently they all laughed, but they knew the heart of that for me was wanting to do these emotional check-ins. No, trust the Lord with all your heart, and also pay attention to your emotions here. So that compassion, that start with heart.
Just so it gives more context. They were describing how I was teaching Sam to drive and how you were teaching Sam to drive.
That's right. And
Dad's like, do this, do that, don't do that, stop doing that. And mom's, trust your feelings.
Our middle one is actually the one that the kids came up with.
We brought this to them. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, side note, we John and I had talked through 4 that we thought were pretty vital to our family, and we decided let's let the kids speak into this last one. And so this is a problem here. We built it up this summer. We're like, hey kids, we're gonna go out to eat. We're gonna have a big family meeting.
Bad Dads.
Bad Dad's Pizza. We're gonna get the Yo Polly. So the kids know this is coming. The kids know this is coming for about 2-3 weeks. Don't make plans with friends, family meeting. So we show up there, and I notice, especially Sam and Claire, they're unusually quiet and very, very observant. And we sit down and we start to talk through this, and I see them both look at each other and go, like, what? And come to find out, they had thought we were gonna make some big life-changing announcement, like we were moving or this. And so they spent the last 2 weeks going like, okay, the other shoe's about to drop, what are they gonna share? So we could have prepped them better for this meeting and saved them a little bit of heartache.
Then again, it made him pay attention.
That's true. Yeah, they were fully present. But over the course of that dinner, we wrote down words, voted, talked this and that, and the kids came up with the word hospitality. That was a value of theirs that they wanted to make sure was central in our family. And they have used that one against me. Some of you may have seen, we put this little clip, I think, on one of the advertisements for this, where a kid will ask, hey, can I have a friend over? And I'll be like, oh, you got the house is not quite ready for that. And then one of them will say, our family value is hospitality, not tidiness. And it has guided the way we live our life. Number 4, the word presence. Presence. And this comes from one of my favorite stories. I have loved this story for years. If you are a fan of Bluey, the cartoon, the TV show, you don't even have little kids at home and you watch. I do too. I love this. It's on Disney Plus. It's these 8-minute episodes, regardless of whether or not you have kids. They're precious. But they told the story as well in there, so you might recognize this. But the story goes something like this. There was a farmer, and one day his horse ran away. And all the townspeople said, oh, what horrible luck. And he said, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, we'll see. The next day, his horse comes back and brings with him 3 other wild horses. So now the man has 4 horses. And all the townspeople say, oh, what wonderful luck. And he says, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, we'll see. The next day, his son is riding one of those wild horses, trying to break it in, and he gets bucked off the horse and he breaks his leg. And all the townspeople say, oh, what horrible luck. And the man says, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, we'll see. And the following day, war breaks out across the land, and army officials come in through all the villages and collect all the eligible young men who can fight, and they pass over this man's son because he has a broken leg. And all the townspeople say, oh, what wonderful luck. And he says, maybe it is, maybe it isn't, we'll see. We don't find that story in the Bible, but there is this kind of open-handedness that comes with that story that is seeks to be fully present in the moment. I think of that story all the time, especially if I think I've heard something from the Lord. Holy Spirit, this is what I'm sensing from you. I think this is where you're nudging me. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But this kind of, we'll see. But this kind of open-handed, this presence has been so important to us. And it was partly that value that kept us going back to Brooksville every quarter, checking in with John's parents, just recognizing, okay, we want to be present here. Yes, we can talk on the phone, we can text, but there's something about getting face-to-face time that matters to us. Our pinky value is simplicity. The best things in life aren't things. So those are our rhythms, those are our values. And by the way, if you know me, you know I like Post-it notes and like little tactiles and paper things that you play with. We don't have any of that for you today. Next week, next month, we'll have some actual physical tools for you to work with that will help kind of lead some of these conversations. But part of that is on purpose. We wanted something simple that you could remember without having to have tools in front of you, something that was maximally accessible. But a few other things I want to add here. The first would just be some daily examples of how this played out in our life, even this last week, okay? So this last week, John and I had arranged for 2 o'clock on Thursday. The two of us are going to sit down and talk through some of this together. We never have times like that during the workday where, okay, that was unusual for us to have something on the calendar. 5 minutes before we met, we got a text from someone, from a couple asking if they could please Zoom with us for an hour conversation. That was not a part of our calendar. This was the important, timely thing we were going to do, but it was so easy to say yes to this couple because of the values that we had in play. Okay, compassion, presence. Boy, the fact that they are asking right now when we are literally about to go into this time together, which we never have during the workday, it made it easy to adjust our rhythm to match our value. Another example of this, even this last week, was, without going into the details, I had what seemed like a call from the Lord, a nudge from the Lord to visit someone, to be present in a particular space. And I had decided, okay, when I get a break in my schedule this week, I'll zip over and I'll spend some time with them. The break didn't come. And I got to Friday morning and I was looking at my calendar and going, there's no space for this. It does not make any sense for me to do this compassionate act here with what I have on my calendar. But there was this sense of, no, this is the value that's going to overtake the rhythm that I thought that I had. This is actually the rhythm that I want to have. And so made some adjustments Friday morning and followed through with this particular visit. And I am so glad I did. Even though it didn't make sense from my calendar point of view, it was a strong enough nudge from the Lord in the values that we wanted to cultivate as a family that made that visit happen. Before I get into the how about you stuff, is there anything else here, John, that I'm missing or that you think we should lean into?
Yeah, just two things. One is what you already hinted at, and maybe we'll come back to, just that our intention is that our next two sessions with y'all, the one in February, we would focus on rhythms, and then the one in March to focus on values and some processes around those. And she'll give you a little bit more guidance about the rhythms. In principle, though, you could start either place, right? You could start with rhythms and then work to values, or vice versa. Everyone's different. That's just what we picked. Almost flipped a coin. It's just how we're going to go about it. So we're going to start with rhythms. And what was the second thing? I don't remember. I'm sure it was great.
Well, you can interrupt me if you think of it.
Maybe so, maybe not. We'll see.
So between now and the next time we meet, would just encourage you to prayerfully be observers of your own life, noticing the rhythms that are already a part of your day. Maybe there's some aspirational stuff in there. Boy, I'd really like to do X, but paying attention to what's already there. I got permission from my mother-in-law to share this from Sharon, but last year, almost a year ago today, Clara came with me to Florida. I had a vocation trip. Like I was doing something over here, and I dropped Clara off with Keith and Sharon for 2 or 3 days just by herself. So it was just Clara with time with her grandparents. And apparently she asked them, at one point she said, "What do you guys do all day?" And they didn't know how to answer her. They were just kind of, And then they sent a follow-up email a few days later that I'm going to share with you here, which makes sense.
Those of you who know my father are already laughing. You can see where this might be going. But
And I'll just read a few snippets from you here. But this is a retired couple living in retirement, trying to pay attention to their rhythms. "Hi, Clara. You asked a very good question when you were here last month. What do you do all day? You're likely wondering because we're retired, we're not going to jobs Monday through Friday, and we've moved to retirement village with a bunch of other senior adults. There are lots of organized activities to do around here, and many that we did when we first lived here: bicycle clubs, serving on boards, watching entertainment, playing shuffleboard, craft classes. But we're not as healthy in these last couple of years, so everything takes longer than it used to. Most days," this is Sharon writing, "Keith makes coffee for us and takes walks, often before dawn. I make cereal or breakfast bread for us. I get exercise for an hour at line dancing twice a week. We take turns walking the dog. We sometimes have the news on in the morning. Let's see here. We do daily devotions. We check our email. We check our schedules. It takes 45 minutes to get a shower and dress for the day. And with added health issues, sometimes that takes longer. Most weeks we have 2 to 4 doctor's appointments, and I get monthly hair appointments and pedicures. We get chiropractic adjustments about every 2 or 3 months. Making meals takes a couple of hours. We order groceries online. We get gifts from Amazon. We do laundry 1 to 2 times a week. We have our small group every Thursday evening. They come here the 3rd week. So getting the house cleaned up and having the snacks takes time. Keith helps many pastors and former students via email on his laptop and his recliner. I have a little desk where I send greeting cards and keep track of birth dates." Let me skip ahead here a little bit. "We have to take care of the house, like the gutters, pruning bushes. We take half-hour naps most afternoons, and then we take an hour golf cart ride in the evening when we visit others. And then we watch TV, usually something funny on YouTube before we go to bed about 8 or 9. Keith gets up earlier than me and has his time alone with God, and then I wake up later and have my time alone with the Lord at night before I fall asleep. There are days that it takes time to look for things we lost and never found." I like that. "Like a hearing aid yesterday, or we have a low tire on the car, or the oil needs changed. Or last week, I drove to the doctor's office on the wrong day, which wasted a couple hours. We make a lot of notes to ourselves to make sure we remember to do something, but we have some things set up for us, like auto pay. We still save receipts and organize them. Since every day is different, we often say, every day is Saturday except Sunday when we go to church." And she says, "Thanks again for your thoughtful question, Clara. I've wondered myself at times what I do all day, but now that I've written it down, I can see it better too."
that's a rule of life document.
Yeah.
Right there. You want to make a change, you start there. You say, okay, maybe one thing out, a new thing in. But if you don't start there, it's just an aspirational document of despair.
Yeah. That was just mundane stuff.
Yeah.